Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you, thank you. Good morning, Vision, the Center for Spiritual Living. Oh my goodness. And that's really what we're after, isn't it? Spiritual living. I mean, we've heard all the ideas and all the words, and now it's about putting into action these principles that we've been studying our whole lives and that wise women and men have been writing about for millennia. That's why we come together to support each other, to bring this business into action. And that's really what my talk is about today, too. But before we get started, I'm seeing this beautiful bouquet behind me, and I'm reminded, and I want to say happy 10th anniversary to Vision. I know that, oh my gosh, I know that you celebrated your 10th last week, and I wasn't able to be here, but I wanted to acknowledge that amazing milestone. I know a few of you in the room understand the unlikely survival of any church and how tough it is when you found something like this. You can't imagine the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into keeping this together. And to be here 10 years means now you're locked in for good. So all the troubles are behind you. This is the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Vision, a Center for Spiritual Living, and we let that go, and we know that we won't be here, but other people who aren't even born yet will be running and loving and being this community. So anyway, so the title of my talk today is The Last Temptation of Buddha. And the question that I want to really think through with you today is this. As spiritual people, how are we to bring our spiritual fruit to bear in the world? You know, what will be our offering? What good is all this praying and meditating? What good are all these wisdom teachings if we don't do anything with it? If we just have good little feelings about it and then go back to our tiny lives? So is spirituality about feeling good? Is it about being comfortable? Or is it about a toolkit for being more fierce and active in the world? And that's a question that's been really pressing on me a lot in these last few months. So we acknowledge that we're drawn toward the truth, of course, and the truth of our interconnectedness, the truth of our love. So what about the woundedness of the world? What about the need for healing? What are we supposed to do about that? So the good news is that in the world's wisdom traditions, there are legions of answers to these questions. And one thing I want to think about with you today, and it ties in with our title, The Third Temptation of Buddha, is this archetypal theme that shows up in so many mythologies and religions, namely the hero myth. The idea of the ordinary person who is called out of their domesticity to leave the known world and go into this difficult unknown realm where none of the old rules apply, and they go through all these ordeals and deaths and losses and challenges and trials, and they are changed by all of that, and then they are transformed, and they bring the boon or the good or the reward back to the world. It's a circular journey, the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell says that we are each the hero of our own lives. And so when we study great heroes like Jesus and Buddha and Frodo and whoever else you want to put in there, we are caught, and we in our gut mirror that story because it is all our story. And one of the common elements of the hero's journey is this three temptations motif. And as our hero is about to transform from a lower mode of being to a higher mode of being, to cross that threshold, a demon shows up to offer three temptations. And I'm betting most people in the room are already thinking about that famous scene in the Gospels, in especially Matthew and Luke, where Jesus is indeed met by a demon who offers him three temptations to ostensibly lure him off of his true path and into a side road, into a ditch, where he will be foiled from achieving his destiny. So on the surface, that's how we've always read it, that, you know, the demon, the monster is there to kind of mess you up and wreck everything. So let's start with the Jesus story, and then we'll get to the Buddha story. Maybe some of you know this already, that in the origin story of the Buddha, there is an identical scene where he is met by the demon Mara on his journey, who offers him 3 temptations. So we'll get to that in a minute. But just a quick look at the more familiar one about Jesus. You know, we are told that when he was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, and the Spirit of the Lord speaks down from the sky and says, "You are my son in whom I am well pleased." And Jesus goes to the wilderness or to the desert, and he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. So the earliest gospel in chronological order is Mark. And Mark tells us that story very tersely, that it just says, "And Jesus went to the desert where he was tempted by Satan." But then when we get to the second and third, and there was a musical interlude too when he was there, and in the second and third gospel, Matthew and Luke, we get the whole story, right? These are the versions that have the transcript of the conversation between Satan and Jesus. And then the Gospel of John, the last gospel, of course, is blank. There's nothing on this story at all. It's missing from that gospel. So let's focus on Matthew. Matthew tells us that Satan gives to Jesus 3 temptations. The first one is Satan says to Jesus, "Oh, if you're such a powerful being, why don't you turn these stones into loaves of bread?" And Jesus says something like, "Because man cannot live on bread alone." And then the second temptation of Satan in the Gospel of Matthew, Satan takes Jesus to the top of this tower and says, "Well, if the Father is your protector in all things, why don't you just throw yourself off this tower? See if he catches you." And Jesus says something like, "Well, it is, we're not here to annoy God or tempt the Lord, right? By making him save us. He's got bigger things to do without me inventing problems." I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, in case you're desperately like, "I don't remember that." So the third temptation in Matthew, of course, is probably the most famous one, where Satan whisks Jesus to the top of a mountain and says, "Look at the world." And says, "I'll make you king of all you survey if you bow down to me." And in the King James Version, Jesus says, "Get behind thee, Satan," which I think means no. I'm not interested in political power. So our hero Jesus, of course, passes the test. He fails to fall for all 3 temptations, and therefore he advances on his sacred mission. Now let's look at the Buddha. 500 years before Jesus, in India, this teacher, Siddhartha Gautama, this Indian prince who realizes the futility of living life for material wealth and pleasure, and he goes into the forest and studies with gurus and becomes more and more extreme in his practice, becomes ascetic and starves himself down to nothing. And then he has an epiphany and realizes, no, I need to start eating again and be on the middle path between all of the extremes. And in the final scene of Siddhartha's transformation, he sits down under the Bodhi tree in the forest to meditate and vows not to arise until he has attained enlightenment. And he's a good meditator, so he's getting close. And I don't know how this works. The demons heard about this, and it's their job to interfere. And so they're like, "Hey, there's this Siddhartha kid in the woods. He's getting pretty close. Who wants to take this one?" And Mara, the demon Mara's like, "I got it." So Mara appears before Siddhartha, we are told, and offers him 3 temptations, again, to interfere with his progress. And in the story of the Buddha, the first temptation is lust. Mara, can I say this here? He pimps out his 2 daughters. And has them dance as strippers in front of Siddhartha and go into their whole routine and to allure him. And this, of course, doesn't have the intended impact on Siddhartha. He grew up in a palace of pleasure with his own harem, and so this whole temptation fails. The second temptation the demon Mara gives is the same one that Satan gave to Jesus, namely political power. Mara says to Siddhartha, if you bow down to me, I'll make you ruler of the whole world, the most political ruler in all of history. And like Jesus, Siddhartha says, no, these guys aren't interested in power of that kind. So now we get to the last temptation of Buddha. And the last temptation is an interesting one. As Buddha becomes close to the precipice of enlightenment, of awakening, Mara says to Siddhartha, okay, I see that you're very good and you're very serious about this. I'll tell you what. I will whisk you immediately to your own nirvana. You'll leave your body, you'll leave the world, you'll go to the celestial sphere of bliss and enlightenment. And Siddhartha says, no. I need to stay in the world of embodied creatures. I'm not here for my own pleasure. I'm not looking for spiritual escape. I need to become awake so that I can work for the alleviation of the suffering of all sentient beings. I need to stay here in this dusty world. And at this, Mara, the demon, is defeated and flees in fear of this powerful being. And we are told in the tradition then, Siddhartha awakens. So the third temptation of Buddha is this temptation, is our spiritual work a salve for our own woundedness? Or is our spiritual work more properly empowerment so that we might be a salve for the woundedness of the world and thereby in the consciousness of service experience the lightening of our own heart and the increase of our own joy and pleasure? As Joseph Campbell said, again, each of us is the hero of our own lives. So these stories in that context are really our stories. And by overcoming the earlier temptations of material comfort and egoic power and the lure of having power over others, we proved our readiness to receive and embody that final revelation, that our dawning wisdom was for something. Now, Joseph Campbell, the great scholar of mythology who writes so powerfully about all these hero myths and all myths, has a term for these demons. The demon Mara in the Buddha story or Satan in the Jesus story. He calls these demons threshold guardians. Threshold guardians. And what that means for Campbell is these demons, far from being our enemy, are actually working for the company. They're all part of the plan. They are the personifications of the natural obstacles that arise when you are indeed working for growth, working toward wisdom. So the threshold guardians are not monsters, but transformational agents. The universe itself places these so-called obstacles in our way in order to facilitate our evolution and our emergence. This is the sense then in which these demon characters are threshold guardians. They are guarding passage to the next level because they know that if we can't pass these three tests, we do not have the strength and resources to survive what's next. Only by proving that we will withstand these temptations do we demonstrate and embody the strengths that will be required at that next higher stage. So in a sense, the threshold guardian is doing you a favor. It's going to keep you at the state you're at until you're ready and have uncovered enough inner strength to do yourself and the world some good at that next level. Our heart, we all know this is cliche, right? Our hardships prepare us, strengthen us for the work ahead. The great Stoic philosopher who lived the first 18 years of his life as a slave, so he knows what he's talking about hardship, called Epictetus, first century Roman thinker. He wrote this, and I have this on my refrigerator because I need to be reminded of this every day. I have a new leak in my house. You know, I have some roofing work coming and drywall repair and painting and all of that. You know, who knew that it would ever rain in Southern California? But so Epictetus said this, the trials we endure introduce us to our strengths. The trials we endure introduce us to our strengths. I know every one of our coaches and teachers have been telling us this our whole lives, but we have to learn it the hard way. So thinking now about integration, about how to put all this together, it seems to me as I think about this and the woundedness of the world and the way that we are all called in ways big and small to be change agents for social justice, in our environmental work, in whatever it is that you are called to do. We've been students of these spiritual traditions a long time, and we're feeling now in our bones a crossroads. That spirituality without commitment to action runs the risk of devolving into escapism. Spirituality without commitment to action runs the risk of devolving into escapism, trading one drug for another. And this is hard for us spiritual folks to talk about or acknowledge. Are we using these teachings to hide from what it is that we are called to do? And then conversely, on the other side, a lot of frantic action without spirituality runs the risk of devolving into self-centered, egoic obsession to control others and control outcomes. If I have no spiritual core at all and I'm just out there in the world working, the ego takes over. I spend all my time angry, resentful, and trying to control everybody and everything. And both of those paths are equally futile and fruitless. So like Buddha's middle path, we come to the middle and we make sure that our spiritual work bears fruit in the field of action and that our action is deeply rooted in our spiritual wisdom and convictions. So that's the new work, is how to integrate these two things. And only when we integrate our spirituality and our action do we truly embody wisdom and show up in the field of action as wisdom. So many spiritual classics are about this. I think of the Bhagavad Gita really as one of the principal texts in the world's wisdom traditions about this issue. How to in one breath embody the divine and struggle in the field of action for the good. And even if that means being in conflict with others, which is, of course, what will happen. So I'm thinking about Meister Eckhart today, too. He had some conflicts. Meister Eckhart was this 13th century Dominican mystic. He's a Roman Catholic priest, an Augustinian friar in Germany, and he began, especially in his sermons, to talk a lot about oneness with the divine. So he got in trouble with the church, and he was branded as a heretic. And it may be because the Franciscans and the Dominicans weren't getting along right then, and who knows, it was probably political. But Meister Eckhart got in trouble, but he had the good fortune of dying before he could be killed by the Inquisition. But he said this, he said, the most important hour is always the present. The most important hour is always the present. The most significant person is always the one sitting across from you right now. The most necessary work is always love. So there's helpful, concrete advice about how to kind of get out of our heads, back into our hearts and hands, and to be the love that we wish to see in the world. He goes on, wisdom consists in doing the next thing you have to do, doing it with your whole heart, and finding delight in doing it. Just do the next thing. And try to let go of that feeling of hopelessness and that feeling of being overwhelmed by the apparent impossibility of ever fixing this messed up world. When setbacks occur, we know that it is simply the ebb and flood tide of this cosmic rise and fall that is always in play, and that I do not get my will every time. It's probably a good thing. Meister Eckhart says this too, that spirituality is not to be learned by flight from the world or by running away from things, or by turning solitary and going apart from the world. Rather, we must learn an inner solitude wherever or with whomsoever we may be. We must learn to penetrate things and find God there. So what if instead of resenting the fact that there is not peace all around me, what if I instead flip that around and say, I will simply bring the peace with me wherever I go? Now I know it's disappointing to learn. I'm sorry to be the one bringing you the bad news if this is news to you, but Gandhi did not say, be the change you wish to see in the world. We can't find it in any of his writings or any of his speech transcripts, but his grandson says it all the time, Arun Gandhi, and he's a teacher. He's in his 80s now, and he's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I said that. And then it kind of got mixed up. So every time you see that meme on Facebook, you can be the smart guy that, well, actually, no, just let it roll by, because you know what? Be the change you want to see in the world perfectly embodies Gandhi's entire oeuvre, his whole deal, so it's fine. But really, that's what we're thinking about too. Wisdom is a way of being in the world, not having the right ideas. Another great lesson from the world's wisdom traditions and teachers is this, it seems to me, and this is a great source of solace, in my opinion. It is not necessary that we have a solution for every problem or an answer for every question. Whew. Good, because I don't. And again, Meister Eckhart on that point, he says, one must not always think so much about what one should do, but rather what one should be. One must not always think so much about what one should do, but rather about what one should be. So again, being wisdom is different than even knowing what wisdom is. Who we are is always so much more important than what we know or what we know how to do. And I think sometimes in our intellectualism, we lose sight of that insight. We think, well, I have to have solutions, I have to have a plan, I have to have a program, I need answers. And from these great spiritual teachers, we get a different message. You don't have to know exactly how to fix the world. Try just showing up and helping that person right in front of you. And maybe that is enough. Because we can never know everything or know how to do everything, but I do have the autonomy over the composition of my character. I can become, or work toward anyway, becoming a man of integrity, a man of kindness, a man of mercy, a man of wisdom, a man of insight. That I can work on. I can't work on you. I can't fix the government. But I can show up differently. That's where I have power, not over others, not over events, but over myself. So the contemporary mystic, Thomas Merton, been reading a lot of Christian writers lately, a lot of Catholics. The contemporary mystic Thomas Merton puts it this way: you do not need, and this is so good for today, for me, you do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. Good, because I don't and I don't. What you need, he goes on, what you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. He goes on, our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. I mean, this is a guy that really read Jesus deeply, prayed Jesus deeply, got Jesus deeply. I'll say that again. Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. That is not our business, he says. In fact, it is nobody's business. And here's the clincher. He says, what we are asked to do is love, and this love itself will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy. Let the love do the work. You don't have to do a thing. Like my friend Ande always says, allow it to be easy. Allow it to be easy. Thomas Merton also says this, do not depend on the hope of results. You may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and even achieve no results at all, if not perhaps results opposite to what you expect. Yeah, I hear by the laughter that you've experienced that as well. As you get used to this idea, he writes, you start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, and the truth of the work itself. You gradually struggle less and less for an idea and more for specific people, helping specific people. In the end, it is the reality of personal relationship that saves everything, Thomas Merton says. So there's, I think, useful advice for us about how to bring our spiritual wisdom into the field of action. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to understand what's happening or have all the solutions and answers. But all this talk we've been having about love our whole lives maybe misses the point about what love even is. It isn't a feeling. It isn't a sentiment. It's a field of being in which our action takes root. We are all Buddhas in the Buddhist tradition. We are all potentially awakened. We just have to wake up. We are all bodhisattvas in the Buddhist tradition. A bodhisattva is another term for the Buddha. 1 foot in eternity, 1 foot in the world. Bridge beings. We are to be bridge beings. Neither completely lost in the spiritual realm or completely and ineffectively in the field of action, but bridging those two realms. And by learning how to balance these two spheres, we finally become fully human. For what is to be human? It is to be holy and flawed and brave and the embodiment of loving kindness. And therein lies our own bliss. You don't have to look for happiness or bliss. When you live lives of compassionate, conscious service, happiness is a byproduct. So all this chasing happiness has been a misunderstanding. Happiness is just what arises when one lives a purposeful life in the consciousness of compassionate action. And so we've come to the end of my little talk, and that's enough talk. And let me just leave you here finally with the words of another first century Roman Stoic philosopher, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He put it this way: stop talking about what the good man is like and just be one. Namaste. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. Thank you.